Hi, and welcome to my presentation. This is my macro change assessment on Head Start eligibility. So to jump right in, the macro population is defined as children of families in poverty who do not currently meet the standards to enroll in Head Start based on their income being too high. So the problem is defined as the rigid eligibility criteria for Head Start that leaves children out that live in varying levels of poverty who would benefit from Head Start services. An overview of the assessment is that the literature has consistently shown positive outcomes associated with Head Start participation. It has also been found that while Hispanic and Black children do represent a larger proportion of children in poverty than white children, they're still enrolled in Head Start at lower rates than white children. So the first step to the assessment and intervention is engagement. So that involves beginning where the macro client is. So we'll want to reach out to Head Start agencies and kind of talk to their staff members and see what they think's going on. We also want to get information on who has applied but been denied services. So we would try to get some of that information directly from the Head Start agencies, and then we would want to reach out to the families who were denied. Another part of engagement would be to establish a social media presence to reach the macro client and to reach members of the public. So something I've been seeing a lot is different Facebook groups that are aimed at different social problems. And I think that's a good way to just get the word out there and get public support and directly involve the macro client in the intervention. We also want to provide opportunities for participation. So that will take place with lobbying events, public events, and fundraising. Some of the public events that I thought about were like maybe a public walk. So for another assignment in this class, I did the Walk for Warmth. And I think those are good ways to get support for a movement because people like to go. It's a social event, it's exercise, they get a free t-shirt, whatever else. So I think that's a good way to get support. And then another important part of engagement is determining the need based on feedback from the macro client. So we want to ask them, what do they need? We want to look at what do they already have and really gauge what they would like to see change. Since I'm not a member of the population, it's important that I don't assume that I know what they want and what they need. So I want to involve them and base the intervention off of their feedback. So to identify the problem further, here I've listed the current Head Start eligibility criteria. So a family must earn an income at or below the poverty threshold. They may also be eligible if they receive benefits from TANF or Social Security. Children in foster care are automatically eligible, and individual Head Start program locations are actually allowed to make exceptions for enrollment for families that earn up to 130% of the federal poverty threshold. However, this is good news and this is what we want to see, but it does make it difficult to make exceptions because they have to cap those exceptions at only 10% of total enrollment. And then, as I mentioned just a minute ago, another part of the problem is the demographic gap in service. So white children are enrolled in Head Start at higher rates than Black and Hispanic children. So while there are no specific current efforts made to expand eligibility criteria, I want to talk a little bit about current efforts to kind of monitor and manage Head Start in the state of Kentucky. So these are the utilization guidelines that are administered to each program on an annual basis. So what this does is encourages them to prevent service duplication. So they want to make sure that no kid is getting two different types of services that maybe they don't need or that one service could cover independently. And another thing in this utilization guideline is a statement that Head Start programs should serve as many children in poverty as possible. So that's good and well, but these the most recent utilization guideline requirements that I looked at made no change to family income requirement. So the eligibility criteria remains the same, even though they're saying serve as many children in poverty as possible. They're not really making that possible. Then House Bill 235 was passed in 2014, so the state got to change eligibility criteria for public preschools. So those are similar to Head Start, but they're ran out of public schools, and it's a different program than Head Start. So those eligibility standards include families up to 160% of the poverty threshold, and that's universal. They don't have to make exceptions to enroll people at that level of poverty. That's where they cap it. And then some more information about current efforts. So over the years, Kentucky has made efforts to ensure quality of early childhood education programs that are ran through the government. So that's your public preschool, early Head Start, and then Head Start. In 2014, the state was granted $44.3 million to run a rating system that's called Kentucky All-Stars. So what this does is it looks at the quality of each center. And in order for a center to get federal assistance and funding, they have to participate in this rating system. So that's a good sign. It shows that the state does care about, the quality of the programs that we have now and is working towards improving that. And then the state of Kentucky also has the Early Childhood Advisory Council and the Governor's Office of Early Childhood, and those programs oversee Head Start. So here, I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can read it. The literature says a lot of good things about Head Start. It has been shown successful in supporting school readiness. Positive outcomes have shown to be stronger on children from high-risk environments, and these outcomes are also sustainable. They're detected in young adulthood. And then Head Start is also successful in decreasing gaps in school readiness between socioeconomic groups and between demographic groups such as white children and Black and Hispanic children. And it also has been projected that by providing universal early childhood education services, those gaps could decrease 20% for Black children and 35% for Hispanic children. Building allies, so we want to align ourselves with the macro client, with the Governor's Office for Early Childhood, the Early Advisory Council, and members of the public. So the hypothesis for change is to decrease the gaps in school readiness among children in poverty. So the inputs will be time spent by proponents of the movement, financial resources, lobbying, and building awareness. The process will be, of course, drafting a plan for change, establishing the social media presence, planning and carrying out those public events, conducting a needs analysis, and then, of course, finally presenting that information to legislators to lobby for policy change. The outputs will be, hopefully, policy change to include 160% of federal poverty threshold that matches the criteria for public preschool, and then, of course, increase the threshold for Head Start eligibility, and increase enrollment of the underserved population, so that's the Black and Hispanic children that are being underserved currently. And then the short-term impacts, we want to see probably within the first year of the intervention to have gathered that public support and have taken forth those efforts to get those advocacy events out there and complete those and to engage in some lobbying efforts. And then long-term is policy change. So of course, increasing that eligibility threshold to 160% of poverty and to increase school readiness within the target population. So here's the conclusion. So we see that over time, education is something that we really value here in America. It's been shown to, support upward mobility. And I think that we need to make sure that members of our most vulnerable population, such as children, especially children in poverty, should have equal access to those types of resources. So in order to achieve a decrease in gaps in school readiness for these kids, we want to change the eligibility criteria to be 160% of the poverty line. Here's my references. And sorry I rushed through the end. I was trying to keep within 10 minutes. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you learned something. Thanks.